Hello and welcome to the Bee Formless Flow Driven VC podcast. I am here with the amazing Barry Winata, who is currently in Sydney, which is exciting. Sydney to Melbourne crew here in Australia. Welcome to the show, Barry.
Thanks for having me, Bee. Great to be on.
Oh, thank you. And I love the fact that you're born in Sydney, but you travel between Sydney and the USA. And you can just hear that little accent where you've got a bit of a mix going on there. I absolutely love it. And yeah, so let's just talk a little bit. I'm going to just share a little bit about you. Hopefully I've got it all right. And then I'll get you to give us a bit about you, your story, what you're doing in the VC space. That is for me reshaping what that space looks like as we head into this new world order. So you're the managing partner of Metagrove Ventures, and I've got to remind myself to ask you where that name came about from. An early stage venture firm which operates between Sydney, San Francisco, with the hub of obviously Silicon Valley. You're also in the emerging space of Southeast Asia and New Zealand. And your background spans engineering, product growth, and operations. It's relatively new. You launched Metagrove only in 2022, so very young to bridge the gap between the ecosystems and supporting the early startups. And I've been having quite a few different conversations with various VCs around this ecosystem and bridging this gap. And it feels like it's a real trend at the moment in terms of, yeah, how do you bridge that gap? And how do you create a more interconnected ecosystem? So I'd be keen to hear and get your own view on that and what you're doing differently in your business. You also favor the domain expert founders with strong industry networks, and you have a real interest in AI, ML, automation, robotics, blockchain, LOT, and developer tools. And I won't lie, I'm not LOT. I'm like, what is that?
Well, I think, yeah, just a correction, it would be IoT, but
Oh,
happy to
sorry,
go into a bit of that.
IoT. There you go. So I won't lie, I'm no expert, but I'm loving chatting with the VCs. And yeah, so tell us a bit about you, your backstory, how you came to Metagrove, and how you're reshaping the
Yeah,
VC.
no, thanks. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I'd always like to just start off with a bit of my backstory, just to pave the way and maybe carve out a journey of mine a little bit, so the audience can sort of understand my path. But yeah, I grew up in Australia, born and raised in Sydney. Went to school here, went to high school, college, university. After that, studied. It was a more or less I'm a highly technical person, so my background is more in engineering. Graduated with electrical engineering and computer science, and I also had another degree in business and in economics and finance. Didn't really use the economics and finance part. That was more like a in my back pocket in case something, the engineering didn't take off. Funnily enough, it's coming back full
Yeah, I
circle
was about
now
to
with the whole
say.
VC stuff. But my bread and butter is technology. I love innovation, love building stuff. So when I grew up in Sydney, I always wanted to, I didn't want to leave Sydney per se. I wanted to just stay in Australia and work in tech for that for those years. But I realized that after I graduated around 2011, there wasn't that much stuff going on in Australia, unfortunately. Obviously, things have changed, which is great news. But back then, I didn't want to be relegated to having an engineering degree and not actually using it. So I wanted to obviously build stuff. Hardware was my thing. I loved writing code as well. So it was very, a bit of a code monkey, loved building stuff. But then I realized that it was difficult and very challenging to get those sort of roles in Australia. And
Mm.
so I sort of started to think about, okay, what would be my next move? I worked in Sydney for a little bit, worked in a defense company, worked in biomedical devices, worked at sort of the Cochlears and CSIROs of the world. And that was fun. But I wanted to work in startups. I wanted to feel and understand what it was like to build a company from zero to one. And we didn't get a lot of those startups, right, during that time. So I made a brash decision to sort of just go overseas. I had to use it or lose a ticket. So I bought a ticket to the US. I had a few jobs interviews lined up, but nothing actually signed on the dotted line.
Yep.
But I thought that it would be just best to, buy a ticket, have an Airbnb ready to go, and then see what happens. So I was very young at that time. So I was like 23, 20, 24. And I had like, okay, there's no strings attached. I'm just going to go for it. And there was nothing for me. There was no huge expectations, I would say. I was like, okay, let's just figure out what this looks like. If I don't get a job, it's okay. I'll come back and
Yeah.
maybe try again, right? But for me, I was like, well, I'm not going to have this opportunity again, and I'm going to be settled down in the future and what have you. So I was like, okay, look, I have this background, I have this experience, I have this sort of drive that I want to do something really cool. So I went to the US, San Francisco primarily, and basically just started interviewing a lot of people, and just trying to get in through the front door. And nothing works better than being able to see someone in person, right?
Yeah, I
And
agree.
have a
That
coffee
human
with them.
connection. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that was sort of the beginning of what I thought would be sort of the next phase of my life. And so from there, I bought that ticket, moved over there, gave myself 2 to 3 months to find a job. And then lo and behold, I was able to get in. I worked for some really great people were kind enough to get an Aussie working at their company in the US. And so I started to pull as many strings as I could. But that was a great experience just for me to be on the ground, work with an early stage, young, vibrant company, and sort of live halfway around the world, right? So it was sort of like my up and coming exposure to the whole Silicon Valley thing.
Did you move
Eventually,
to San Francisco? Sorry, did you go straight to San Francisco? Was that where you landed and were like,
yeah, so the
yeah,
plan was to go to like a bunch of like other cities like Singapore and London to see where I would sort of vibe with. London didn't really like the weather. Singapore is too hot. So I feel like the Bay Area and Silicon Valley, if people don't realize this, it's just the inverse of Sydney. So the climate is actually quite
yeah,
comparable
it's pretty
between
consistent.
Sydney
Yeah.
and San Francisco.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Oh, this is kind of nice. I'm an outdoorsy person. I like to run and hike and, ski and all that stuff. So there's a lot of stuff to do outside of work. And, the language was quite similar. The culture was very similar. So I wanted to sort of just plant myself there. And over that time, I decided to, work between a lot of startups. As soon as I got my foot through the front door, it was actually much easier to get connected with other startups in that
Yeah.
region, no other investors. I think people don't realize that, like, once you're in, you're actually in that sort of circle. And so it was kind of nice where there was a lot of opportunities from that startup to go to another one and another one. And so I started hopping around a lot of these startups around the valley, and it was really nice to sort of get exposure to different types of industries. They're working with amazing people, super smart and intelligent from all around the world. You know, People don't realize that Silicon Valley is a melting pot. It's not just of technology, it's also of cultures as well. A
Yeah.
lot of
I've
people
heard
coming in from
this. Yeah.
Asia, from Europe, from other states in the US, from Australia, and then you meet a lot of people. Whereas in Australia, it can be kind of bit of a monoculture. You're only working with fellow Aussies, for example, or fellow Kiwis. Whereas in the US, it is very dynamic and you get to pick their brains quite a lot. You learn about their cultures, their way of doing things,
Mm.
their mindset is really important. And then for me, yeah, that was sort of the beginning of what I thought was like, like I like what I'm doing here, but I don't think I don't want to be like an engineer for the rest of my life, if that makes sense. And I wanted to see what was on the other side. And so I started dabbling in a couple of other things, like, working with other early stage companies, building an agency on the side as well. But I always kept coming back to advisory and working with like multiple companies at any given time.
Yeah.
I used to talk to a lot of other people about how I got into VC, and it was kind of like organic. It wasn't necessarily VC. I never wanted to build a venture capital firm, but it was like I wanted to just help companies as much as I can.
Yeah.
That was sort of like an individual advising. So after work, I would get on a phone call and just have calls during, after work for the rest of the night. And then that kind of like trickled over to running a syndicate, right? So I have my own personal syndicate that I run, bring in deals from that. And then eventually people started wondering, like, this sounds like it's going somewhere. Why don't you do something a bit more formalized, right? Like a bit more official. And so I've been sort of like umming and ahhing for quite some time. So this was in 2019, 2020. And that
Right at
was
the
sort
start
of
of COVID.
exactly. So a lot of time on our hands. And I feel like, well, this is sort of like the time of never where I want to do this. I never wanted to build a VC firm just for the US market, if that makes sense. There's a lot of US VCs already doing really well there. I wanted to figure out how can I build a go like a cross-border fund that would invest not in just the US, but also invest in Australian founders, Kiwi founders, and like non-US specific founders.
Yeah.
I think that from what I saw and just growing up in Australia, I realized that there's so much talent here, right? There's a lot of talent in Australia, world-class academic institutions. Um, but the problem is that they just don't have access to the right connections or the access to the
Yeah.
right capital. And so I feel like, well, this is sort of a gap, an opportunity where I could use my network, I could use the people that I've connected with and my experience overall working between the two regions to figure out how can I help sort of the next wave of entrepreneurs
Mm.
sort of springboard themselves from Australia into the US market or from Southeast Asia into other markets, right? And so that's sort of the impetus of what triggered Metagrove in the first place. And you asked me about
The name, yeah,
what the
I'm
name, yeah,
always
the name
curious.
of Metagrove. Well, it's
Is it
always
a
a
plant? Sorry, is it a plant analogy? Like, is metagrove something to do with a plant or a growth or
no,
something?
well, it's like a community, if that makes sense.
Okay.
So, you know, I think the grove is really like the community of trees and what have you.
Yeah.
The meta this is interesting. So Meta, before the whole crypto thing and Web3 thing, Meta was just a name that people used for beyond. So what's the next stage of like
Yeah.
the Metascape, whatever. But then, funnily enough, um, Facebook
I was
renamed
about to say.
themselves to Meta at the same time we renamed ourselves to Metagrove as well. So, I mean, they renamed themselves on the back of the Web3 hype, but we renamed ourselves because of that sort of community and figuring out what the next phase was for venture capital and all that stuff, right? So that's the sort of the genesis of Metagrove, but it kind of stuck. It's a unique name. People vibe with it, so I'm like I'm gonna stick with it.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, it was great just to sort of get to know a lot of founders. As soon as I started to make my fun a bit more exposed on social media and what have you, a lot of founders from these regions kept reaching out to me and they were like, well, we like what you're doing with the US market. It's great. We want to see how we can get to the US market. And so that was sort of like the beginnings of what Metagrove would be of today, right? And I think for us, that's been really fun to see and really rewarding to work with a lot of early stage founders who want to get to other markets. But yeah, we're very early, as you said, super young, but we definitely have a strong mandate behind us, and we definitely want to see that through as well.
What's your strong mandate out of interest, or you don't want to share it?
No, happy to share it. I think, the way we structure ourselves is we're not agnostic, if that makes sense. We
Yeah.
don't like invest in everything. And there's a lot of VCs that do that really, really well. We we have a couple of mandates for we have a geographic mandate, as I just explained.
Yeah.
We have a sector mandate and a stage mandate. So the geographic TLDR is, Southeast Asia, Oceania, and then the US market, right? The US
Yeah.
market is still by far the strongest market for early stage companies. And I don't
Yeah.
think we're
Right.
going to shy away from that.
Yeah.
The sector mandate is interesting. We invest in sort of industries that have been quite traditional for a long time. So these are kind of legacy sectors. So things to do with like logistics or supply chain. We're now starting to see this sort of influx of like AI and blockchain and all those technologies you mentioned at the beginning permeate all of these industries. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, what is it going to look like in the next
Yeah.
5, 10, 20 years, right? Not just next year. And considering how fast technology is moving, we're now starting to see a lot of examples of how AI and robotics is playing a huge role in warehousing, for example, or logistics. So a lot of these industries, people think, oh, it's kind of boring and all that stuff, right? But if you think about it, if you're with Amazon, you have Prime delivery, a lot of that stuff relies on warehousing, a lot of logistics,
Yeah.
supply chain stuff that people don't realize under the hood. So I think that's what gets me excited. It's not sexy industries, but it's really fun to see how technology is disrupting those,
Transforming. Yeah.
transforming those unsexy industries, right, over time.
Mm.
And now, like with physical AI coming through as well, we're starting to see this massive explosion, this sort of like renaissance of technology where AI is just sort of like permeating all of these sectors in good ways and bad ways and what have you. But nonetheless, I think it's been really fun to see how technology is shaping these types of legacy sectors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't had that chat about the legacy sectors and going in and working with those legacy sectors because there's a massive opportunity. It's almost like just when you thought the life cycle of, that sector was, matured, it's like here we go again, but it's reshaping it completely with a revolutionary piece of tech, which is AI, which isn't going anywhere. And so it's like you say, it's that renaissance that when you think about it, it's like, yeah, right. Like it isn't boring. It's a very interesting space and place to be watching and playing in, because it's like, look what's possible. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think when people ask us what sort of like VC you are, it's hard to just sort of encapsulate that within one word. But in a sense, we're sort of like an industrial based VC.
Yeah, right.
There is a lot of we're not deep tech per se. It is on the verge of deep tech in some shape or form, but we're sort of still, there's still B2B SaaS, there's still stuff like that that really excites us. But it's just the application on that on the industries themselves that
Yeah.
make us industrial. And I think there's a lot of like, networks that are being formed right now that and patterns that allow us to see what does technology look like in these types of sectors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and what do you see as the role, like, I mean, from a VC perspective, that human piece, you talked about it at the very start, everyone likes to connect in person, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that that is going to be more important than ever with, I guess, with the amount of tech coming through now? Like, what's your view on that? Like, in terms of, yeah, especially with these traditional, if you like, sectors or the industrial, and now that you can completely revolutionize it with the tech that's coming out and it's not going away.
Yeah. I mean, like, when people ask me about like AI and jobs and especially that sort of human connection, Uh, I think there's still a lot of processes that are being managed and operated by humans. I don't think that's going to change. I think jobs will certainly be displaced. Some will be eliminated completely. And I think there's this sort of sense that people are concerned about their jobs. And I think they have every right to be, right? It makes sense that AI is becoming much more influential and becoming much more smarter, more intelligent, much more hardworking. And so I view the next phase of what this might look like in a couple ways. I think it's a positive at the end of the day. I think that it's going to free up a lot of time in terms
Yeah.
of how AI and not just AI, but just technology in general is going to sweep across these industries. I would say that yes, there's going to be a lot of jobs that are going to be, foregone. There are going to be people that get replaced or retrained or reskilled. And I think that's important, right? I don't think this is not the first time this has happened, by the way. I think people say this has never happened before. Well, kind of yes and no. If you look historically at the way that the car or the automobile
Yeah,
shaped the
agree.
world, right?
Mm.
You had horse-drawn carts back in the 1900s, and then comes along Ford, Mercedes, right? They start to build cars. Horses are not going to disappear, right? They've been repurposed for recreational purposes or for sports, for athletics, for things that are non-logistically based, right? And so I think there's just going to be this reshaping of what technology
Mm.
looks like. I don't think it's a bad thing. It's just going to be a reshifting of allocation, a reallocation of resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so there is definitely going to be a lot more automation that comes through, but that means that it's going to free up a lot of more time for people like you and me to do other things like, right, have podcasts and all those things that matter to us, right?
Yeah.
Things that are monotonous and quite menial, those things will be automated. And I think that's healthy. You need that. It's not healthy for someone to be sitting on a conveyor belt 24/7 looking for things and assembling things. It's just not mentally stimulating, and it's not a worth life living. It's not a life worth living. If that makes sense, you've got to give the tools and ability of these people to be more creative and in other pursuits as well. So I think, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I think this is definitely a positive when it comes to technology. But obviously there are disadvantages to that as well. But I think overall it's a positive.
Yeah, I do too. I could not agree with you more. And I think that, we have to embrace it and we have to look at it that way because if we stare at it and look at it like, oh my God, I'm not going to have a role and this and that and like what hope do we have? So it's how do we look at it in a way that you've like landed on, this shaping and reshaping. It is a continuous shaping and reshaping. And if you look at history, like you say, it's just shaped and reshaped and shaped and reshaped. But we sometimes get stuck on like what's in front of us and the fear of it or, what's behind us. But what about if we just stood here? I just had a question for you and it's completely slipped my mind, but it was a good question. It will come back to me. That's really annoying. Don't you hate that when you have this question? And it was to do with everything we had just spoken about. So I will pivot for a second because I know this question will come back to me. How do you as a managing partner and working across different time zones? How do you manage that? Like, how do you said to me pre-show you're in the US, what, around roughly 3 times a year. You're based in Sydney at the moment. I mean, New Zealand's closer, but then you've got the USA and then obviously Southeast Asia. Like, are you working around the clock 24/7 or do you find a way to like,
Yeah,
I think
it's
about the VC space and like, as a founder, as someone who is scaling their business, which is ultimately, what you're doing, how do you work through that? How do you manage that so it isn't just work, work, work?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, I think the great thing is that to have people around you that you can
Yeah.
trust, right? And even though that most of the heavy lifting is done by me, and that will change with the next fund. We're bringing on more people, which is great. But at least for the initial fund, yeah, there was a lot of heavy lifting on my part, as you would when you're a founder of a startup, right? You're doing, as the CEO and co-founder, you definitely want to do a lot of the stuff, and then eventually you start to delegate and delegate and
Yeah.
delegate. So that's the same story, right, with VCs, that eventually you build strong connections with people that I've met in the US. And so I've been able to rely on them to help me with connecting with founders and engagements. The great thing about Sydney, or at least this time zone, is that you can have good conversations with people on the West Coast early in your morning. So if you're waking up around 7 a.m. in the morning Sydney time, it's probably like early afternoon in San Francisco, for example. So people are still at work, people are just having
Yeah.
lunch. So there's still that window of time where you can connect with people, which is always great. Some people work throughout the night as well, so it's always nice on for me to sort of connect with them throughout my day. Then also on the other side is like, well, Southeast Asia is like waking up, right? They're behind us. So I always have this nice window of time where I can connect, to West Coast Pacific time, US. They're sort of like winding down for the day. And then I pick up Aussie hours. And then during that time, I work with people in Australia, in New Zealand, and then from time to time, I'll work with people in Southeast Asia as well. So all in all, I'd probably do, probably longer than I should, probably 12, maybe 12 more hours a day. But, I break the day up in chunks.
Yeah,
So I'm not
blocks.
completely doing like 12-hour straight shifts. It's like, okay, maybe in the morning, couple hours, deep work, connecting with founders and investors and doing due diligence and what have you, and then bit of a break for lunch and going out for a walk or to the gym, and then afternoon sort of resuming that work. So it's always nice. It's like there's that flexibility, but as I mentioned, like it's not just that. It's like the fact that you can rely on people
Yeah, support crew.
that are in these time
Yeah.
zones that help you out as well.
Yeah, and I love that you've factored in the flexibility and the micro breaks throughout because I think it's super healthy. My question it did come back to me. It's to do with and another complete pivot. Well, not complete, but you work with early startups, right? And you have a newsletter. which is currently called V's newsletter. And you were talking to me, we were having a bit of email exchange, and you were talking around, providing tips and tools and, I guess how you can support early startups. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, when it comes to being in any space, and whether it's VC or not, from a founder perspective, like having that support in terms of just to be able to have those tips or tools or whatever it is at your fingertips is so important. And it's not just from a practical work-wise operationally. It's also from a, like you said, you talked earlier about a mindset piece, right? Tell us a little bit about what you're providing these early startups.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, uh, one of the challenges that I've had for a long time is trying to figure out what do people need. It's one thing, venture capital sometimes gets a bad rap
Mm,
because they don't help. And that is true, right? A lot of VCs just don't help. Um, and I didn't want to become that type of VC. Otherwise, there would be no reward for me specifically. I obviously wanted to be as helpful as I can. And I know that a lot of VCs say that as well. So it sounds like a broken record. But for me, there is an aspect of like, okay, what does tangible support look like, right?
mm,
Instead of just throwing money in, which is always helpful,
yeah,
but the fact of the matter is that money can only get you so far, and it can only get you through so many doors. The real the real value add is what I call sort of de-risking, is how do you get in a position to help them through, whether it be like very simple stuff, could be, okay, I know a potential customer. I'll introduce you to them, right? That's a very simple email that you can do. Or it could be even simpler than that. Someone said a founder messages you with a update on their progress. And typically you wouldn't expect a response back, but just simply replying, "Hey, this is great. Great job on the work
feedback.
that you've done," right? That's huge for a founder, right? And it's sort of like there are tiers of support that you can offer. And I think that one thing that I wanted to be more proactive about is just trying to share as much stuff that I can with founders. So if I find something really cool, I'd share with the founder. And then that was sort of the genesis of the newsletter, where I was sharing all of these really cool things privately with the founders that I worked with, that I was like, huh, I think other people could benefit from
Mm,
this. And so I just started to compile everything into a newsletter and share it with the world, right? And once in a while, I'll still continue to send out little things that are applicable to specific founders. But overall, I think the biggest thing is that you're always there for them. If they need to reach out to you in the middle of the night, obviously otherwise, if you don't have any other big commitments, you're there for them, right? I always make sure that founders have connection to my WhatsApp or my number, or text me
mm.
anytime, because you just don't know what's going to happen. And if they need support, then I'm happy to help in any way. I think more VCs are doing this, which is
Yeah, I
exactly
agree.
what that definition is supposed to. You're supposed to help. There are cases where we can't help, where I feel like it's too out of my depth, and I don't want to fake like I know I'm talking about. So in that sort of situation, I will always try to find people within my network
Connect
who
them.
can help, right? And so I can always put them in touch, right? Because you only know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So I try to draw the line about, okay, what am I really good at versus I have no idea what you're talking about, but I do know people who are really well versed in that field, and then maybe I can connect you with them, and then you can hit it off as well. So I think that's sort of like the type of support as much as we can. There is another tier of support as well, as like, okay, how can we introduce you to potential investors down the road, right?
Mm.
Because a lot of the stuff that we invest in is early stage. So when you invest in them, it's not like you can just dust your hands off and walk away. You have to make sure that you can open doors for them for
Yeah.
the next round and the next round after that, right? So you're going to continue the momentum as much as you can. The best way to do that is to make introductions to growth stage investors, or to investors who can write bigger check sizes, or who can help much better than you can. So if you can find ways to create those introductions as early as possible, that de-risks them and also de-risks you as well. So it's a win-win in trying to make sure that you can get them to the next finish line and then beyond that as well. So I think there's different types of support, but I think hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does, and it's really interesting. Like I said to you earlier, pre-show, that I'm seeing a real trend that is that it's like this new era of VCs where it's there is a bit of from my observation, I could be completely wrong, but there's the investors and there's these founders, and then so how do you bridge the gap to bring them together so that the investors better understand what's going on for the founder as they're building, scaling a business, and the investors not just kind of going where's the results sort of thing. And it's almost like you're the VC is in the middle, like almost kind of like holding it together in terms of providing that support to the founders, because as anyone in a startup, it's really hard. It's really hard. It's like mentally, it's physically, it's everything. It's blood, sweat, and tears, and you just you need that. You need those tools, you need those tips, you need that encouragement, you need that feedback with what I call positive intent. Do you know what I mean? So it's a really interesting, yeah, that you're doing that. And I love that you're providing that to the founders or early startups.
I
Of
think
course,
and
yeah,
just on top of that, people just don't realize how hard it is to build a company. And even if it's just a solopreneur or even just building an agency, right? As you would know, it's just it's just hard, right? And so the question is,
all right.
like, why would you do that? Like a lot of founders that I speak to, they have left their six-figure paying job to start from scratch again, reset themselves a little bit,
Me.
and figure out exactly what they want to do next, right? A lot of the founders I talk about, I ask them like, why? You have such a great role, you're doing everything right. Why do this? And a lot of the responses I get is that I just want to do something for me. Like I want to own this. I want to control it. I want to be able to do something that wakes me up in the morning and not feel like a grind, if that makes sense. I want to be able to own this piece and carve out my own journey, if that makes sense, right? And I think that resonates with a lot of founders. And I think when founders get into that game of being a startup founder themselves, some just don't realize how challenging it is to get your first customer, to get the first check as an investment, right? It is really, really hard. And I just put that frame of mind into founders who are doing this for the first time, is that, things are going to be a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, what do they call
So
it? Death Valley? You guys call it Death Valley or something? When
yeah, exactly.
you're in the
The
Death Valley?
valley,
Like, I'm like, I totally relate to the Death Valley. It's like, how long do you stay? How long is the Death Valley for before you just like, oh, but you've got to celebrate the small wins daily. If you do not
100%.
celebrate the small wins, and you brought up finishing lines, you've got to have a continuous finishing line, because if you're looking at a finishing line that is way over here, you're just setting yourself up for, like failure in a way, because the finishing line is too far away. You got to have, like, I feel like you got to have daily finishing lines.
Exactly. 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I think I cut you off. So I think you're on.
No, no, no. I was just going to say that that was sort of like, in terms of foundership and being able to work with those really great people is, we make decisions based on the team. It's not necessarily like the idea and the go-to-market, all of that stuff is just fluff at the end of the day, to be honest, especially at the early stage. You are investing in the founders at the end of the day. You're not investing in the
Yeah.
product or product that hasn't really come to full potential yet. It is really just about the team. And that means that we have to do a lot of due diligence and understanding of the team to make sure that they can, execute. They can uh, be resilient enough when stuff hits the fan. So, you really want to be mindful of who you work with because some people will give up easily. And some people will just keep going and they will just continue to pivot and pivot like left, right, and center until they find product market fit. And those are the people that you want to work with.
Yeah, I love that, and it's probably like what I have one final question for you, but I absolutely love you highlighting that because it's so true. And I spoke to one of my business mentors last week, and we are having this very conversation, and he was like, "B, like you just got to keep growing. Like it is. It's hard. It's tough." But you're like, don't quit, because if you quit, like, there's it's a minute I don't even know what the number would be, but you're absolutely right. Like it's how and I think it's more than resilience, actually. I think it's being how anti-fragile can you be to keep bouncing
Yep.
forward, to be able to pivot, to be able to go, all right, that didn't work, or that's not working, or, that failed. Right, how do I go now? Without being reactive, it's being strategic every step of the way. But the ability to go, all right, knocked down, back up again, learnt from that, I'm bouncing forward. Because resilience is just about bouncing back. And I think that is a real mindset piece that you need to have, as you are, building or scaling or starting a business, and also coming full circle back to your micro breaks, your active recovery to keep yourself fresh. Because if you're slogging away like this all day at your laptop and, push, 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 it doesn't work. Like you need to be able to get those fresh perspectives. So I love that you call that out. Yeah, it's really and the team piece, because the people piece. One last question, so I can let you get back to your day. What would be my final question for you? Given that you're working across Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia as emerging, and the USA, what do you see the VC space looking like in the next 12 months in terms of with everything going on from a tech perspective, from AI, etc. And I know you're not playing in deep tech, but what do you see is going to be the biggest shift or shape shifter, if you like, in the VC space?
Yeah, so I think people will probably agree with me this with in terms of what I'm about to say, but I think AI obviously is a huge factor there. Um, in terms of what VC will look like, I don't know to be honest, but I have what I can tell you is that there's been a lot more noise than signal. I think there's going to be, you know, what I'm seeing right now is that there's a lot of more solopreneurs building tools and products using AI with the whole emergence of like vibe coding and all that stuff that's happening, which is great, by the way. I think it gives more tools and more access to people who couldn't code in the past, the ability to build products, not having some sort of coding background. So that opens the floodgates to a lot of more people to start getting into the startup space, right? The question is whether they should be VC backed or not, right?
Yeah.
And I think for what we're seeing a lot more noise, as I mentioned. So, how do you sift through that noise for signal? I think I would recommend that no one really does raise for venture, to be honest. Even though I'm in VC, I would love if someone just bootstrapped, right?
I'm
The only
bootstrapping.
way that you would get into VC in terms of external fundraising is
Mm.
if you actually need the money, right? And so the question is, okay, what does that look like? Well, if you're building something with high capital, right, capex, or if you need to scale quickly, you need to go to market quickly, and you need this sort of like acceleration. If you need acceleration, then VC is great for that, right? But also bear in mind that with VC, founders have to give up a bit of their equity to do
Yeah,
that as
100%.
well. So there is that balance, that fine balance between what you can give up and what's the benefit of that as well. And that's why I keep harping on about like you've got to work with strategic investors. So we can't work with every founder on our end, even though we'd love to. It doesn't make sense. So we only work with the founders that we think are better aligned with our mandate and in the industry that we can help, right? And so for I think back to your question about what I see in the next 5, 10 years, even maybe less than that, I think there's going to be more noise, a lot more companies being built by solopreneurs. People are being bootstrapped as well. That's also going to be on the rise, which means that there's going to be like a bit of a chasm, which means that, okay, for the companies that do want to be venture backed, what are the opportunities there? And I
Mm.
think there's going to be a narrowing of that. So there's going to be a bit more folks coming into these types of spaces that says, hey, we can do bootstrap this. That's perfectly fine. But then, well, we need to be better than everyone else, and we need to get to market faster than everyone else. That's where VC money would come in as well. But then overall, I think holistically, like I said, AI is definitely making ways there. But just things about the penetration of AI is huge, right? So that's why I go back to the mandate that we have is like AI isn't just a standalone thing. It has to be applicable to industries. So it could be supply chain, could be data,
Yeah.
whatever it may be. So I think right now with the whole wave of agentic AI that's coming through, there's going to be more use cases and applications of agentic AI in these types of verticals. So, people will call this vertical SaaS AI or vertical AI SaaS, but that's really the next frontier is like, what can AI do on a very niche, sort of like niche or even sub niche of category?
Yeah,
And then
okay.
how can they then shape the that sort of workflow where you're getting this sort of system of record. So a system of record is basically like storage. You have memory, and when you're collecting information by, imagine like a CRM, for example. A
Mm.
CRM is a system of record at a very basic level. So you're getting information from like customers, sales data, people that you're reaching out to in this one database.
Mm.
That's sort of like the old world. The new world is a system of action, right? And so how can we use the data that we've collected to act on that data? And I think with the whole agentic AI coming through, it's going to be less people doing all that sort of trigger points, like what do I do with this data to reach out to this person? Agentic AI will come in and be able to automate that entire workflow, for example. So, and that is repeatable. That just doesn't
Yeah,
happen in basic
exactly.
CRMs.
Yeah.
It's different industries. Data is such a huge thing now that, it is that sort of next age of data and AI.
Yeah.
So I think that's what I'm going to hopefully see in the next couple of
Yeah.
years.
And I guess you can't underestimate the power of human potential and creativity that's going to come out with the automation and everything else. Like we're going to see a lot more, I think, a lot more creativity than we've ever seen before and innovation as well. So because we're going to be free to do so, like our brain, do you know what I mean? Like I think
Yeah.
it's going to be very interesting. Barry, how do we find out more? How do we sign up to your newsletter? How do we find out about more about Metagrove? You,
Yeah, so if you're a startup that's building something super cool, always open to cold DMs, whatever, or cold emails. You can send me an email at barry@metagrove.vc. You can also apply through our website. We have a pitch form, application form. So that's just metagrove.vc. And that'll tell you all about who we are. If you want to connect with me personally, you can connect. LinkedIn is sort of probably the best approach. I'm on X as well. So it's just Barry Winata, one word, on LinkedIn, and you should be able to find me. Same thing on X. And if you want to subscribe to my newsletter, so the URL is called Bee's Letter, but the full name is Alpha Bytes. So if
that's
you want to
right.
subscribe to Alpha Bytes, where every week I provide weekly, doses of information that I find really interesting on everything from AI to deep tech to crypto, to just becoming a better thinker overall. You can subscribe to that as well. But yeah, you can put all of that in the show
Yeah,
notes.
I will. Absolutely. I've got it all. I just like hearing it from the person who's who it is. So, Barry, thank you so much. It's been an awesome chat with you. Really, I'm glad we got to vibe and yeah, I can't wait to see what you do next. I feel like you've got a hugely successful path ahead. So, thank you.
Thanks, B. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, enjoy your afternoon. Hopefully you get to go out for a walk or a run, if it's not rainy in Sydney.
No, it's beautiful. Actually, it's quite warm today. It's like 24 degrees today,
Oh,
so
good.
it's
Yeah,
very
nice.
nice.
We're taking your rain. Thank you, Barry. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, B.
Thanks.